This is a cab that engineers are still sitting in today. The EMD GP38-2 and SD40-2 have been driven by generations of American railroaders, and they are still being driven in daily service half a century after they were built. The controls are simple, rugged, and standardized. An engineer who can run one EMD hood unit can run almost any of them. That standardization made these locomotives the machines that generations of railroaders learned their craft on. This is what it is like to drive the most successful diesel locomotives in American history, the workhorses that have carried American freight for 50 years and counting. The operating experience that trained a nation of engineers, and that is still happening right now. The cab that never went out of service. The GP38-2 and SD40-2 are hood units, a full-width cab at one end and a narrow hood housing the machinery. This layout, which replaced the streamlined cab unit format of the F unit, gave the crew far better visibility and made the locomotives easier to operate and maintain. Inside, the operating experience built directly on what the F unit established. The consolidated control stand, the 8-notch throttle, the dynamic brake, the air brakes, multiple unit operation, all of it carried forward from the F unit and refined into the standard that defines modern American diesel operation. What it was like to drive these locomotives is, in many ways, what it is still like to drive a diesel locomotive today. They established the modern operating experience, and because they are still running, that experience is not history. It is current. This is the operating experience that became the American standard, told through the two locomotives that spread it across the entire rail network. The heart of the operating experience is the control stand. The throttle moves through 8 notches, idle, then notch 1 through 8 exactly as the F units did. Each notch commands a specific engine speed and power output. The engineer advances the throttle to accelerate and reduces it to slow down. On the GP38-2, the throttle commands a roots-blown 16-cylinder engine producing around 2,000 horsepower. On the SD40-2, it commands a turbocharged version producing around 3,000. The engineer feels the difference. The SD40-2 has more power to give, especially when starting heavy trains, but the control layout is the same. The engineer monitors the load meter, which shows how hard the locomotive is working. Reading the load meter, the engineer manages the throttle to apply power without exceeding what the rails can hold, watching for wheel slip, and easing off when the wheels begin to lose grip. The dynamic brake, inherited directly from the F unit, lets the engineer use the traction motors as generators to slow the train electrically, saving the friction brakes. On the SD40-2's heavy mainline work, especially descending grades with a long train, the dynamic brake is essential. The engineer manages it with a dedicated control alongside the throttle. The air brakes work as they have since the F unit, the automatic brake for the train, the independent brake for the locomotive. The engineer manages train handling with the same fundamental skills, making staged brake applications, controlling slack, and stopping smoothly. The whole control stand is designed for one engineer to manage the locomotive, and, through multiple unit operation, several coupled locomotives at once during long hours of freight work. It is comfortable enough for a full shift, simple enough to master, and rugged enough to survive decades of hard use. But the single most important thing about driving these locomotives is what happens when you couple several together. Because one engineer runs them all. Multiple unit operation, established by the F unit and refined in these locomotives, is the foundation of modern freight work. 2, 3, 4, or more units couple together and respond to a single control stand. The engineer in the lead cab commands every unit's throttle, dynamic brake, and functions through the mu connection. A modern freight train might use 3 or 4 SD40-2s to move 10,000 tons. The engineer runs all of them from the lead cab. The horsepower scales with the number of units, the crew does not. This is the operating principle that makes modern heavy freight possible, and these locomotives spread it across the network. The cab is equipped with two-way radio, letting the engineer communicate with the conductor, the dispatcher, and other trains. Over the decades, many of these locomotives received updated equipment, modern radios, event recorders, and safety systems layered onto the original rugged platform. The everyday reality of driving these locomotives is long-haul freight work. Hours at the control stand, managing a heavy train across division after division. reading signals, managing speed, handling the trains slack over grades and through curves, coordinating with the conductor. It is demanding, skilled work, and these locomotives are the machines that generations of engineers did it on. Because the GP38-2 and SD40-2 were sold to nearly every railroad and are still operated by short lines, regionals, and Class 1s, an enormous number of American engineers learned the craft in these exact cabs. The standardized controls meant an engineer could move between railroads and between locomotives and immediately be at home. The GP38-2 in particular became the locomotive of everyday railroading, local freights, switching, branch lines, and short line work. Its simplicity and reliability made it the machine that does the unglamorous, essential work of the rail network. Countless engineers have spent their careers running GP38-2s on jobs that never make the news but keep the freight moving. And here is what makes driving these locomotives unique in this whole series. You do not need archival footage to see it. You can go find one working right now. Every other locomotive in this series represents an operating experience that has largely ended. Driving a big boy, a GG1, a K4, these are experiences reconstructed by preservationists or gone entirely. But driving a GP38-2 or SD40-2 is a job that thousands of people still do every day across North America. An engineer reporting for work on a short-line railroad this morning may well be climbing into the cab of an SD40-2 built in the 1970s. The locomotive is old, but the job is current. The controls that engineer uses are the same controls in the same layout that engineers have used for 50 years. This continuity is remarkable. An engineer trained on an SD40-2 in 1975 and an engineer trained on one in 2025 learned essentially the same operating experience. The 8-notch throttle, the dynamic brake, the mu operation, the train handling, the fundamentals have not changed because the locomotives have not changed. These locomotives trained a nation of railroaders. The operating techniques that engineers learn today, even on modern locomotives, descend directly from what these machines established. When a new engineer learns to notch out a throttle, manage a dynamic brake, or handle slack in a long train, they are learning a craft that these locomotives standardized. And the locomotives keep working because they are genuinely good to operate. Reliable, predictable, rugged, and simple enough that an engineer can focus on the train rather than fighting the machine. That operational quality is a large part of why railroads keep running them decades past their expected retirement. The operating experience these locomotives established has proven so durable that it outlasted the F unit that created it, and it continues today in machines that are half a century old. Driving them is not a historical reenactment. It is a working job that connects the present-day engineer directly to the entire history of American diesel operation. The GP38-2 and SD40-2 represent something unique in this series, an operating experience that never ended. The big boy, the GG1, the K4, the Class J, the GS4 all belong to eras that have passed, their operation preserved or gone. But these locomotives kept the operating experience alive by simply continuing to work. For the engineer, driving these locomotives is the everyday craft of American railroading. The throttle, the dynamic brake, the air brakes, the multiple unit operation, the train handling, the signals, the coordination with the conductor. It is skilled, demanding work, and these locomotives are the machines that most defined how it is done. The operating experience descends directly from the F unit, which ended steam and created the modern diesel cab. The GP38-2 and SD40-2 took that experience, standardized it, and spread it across the entire network, and then kept it alive for 50 years by refusing to wear out. Every American diesel engineer working today owes part of their craft to these locomotives. The techniques, the control layout, the operating philosophy, all of it traces through the GP38-2 and SD40-2. They did not just move freight, they trained the people who move freight. And unlike every other locomotive in this series, you do not have to imagine what it was like to drive one. Somewhere in North America, right now, an engineer is doing exactly that, running a 50-year-old EMD hood unit through a day's work, practicing the living craft that these locomotives established. Driving a GP38-2 or SD40-2 is the experience of operating the most successful diesel locomotives in American history. The everyday craft of railroading, established by the F unit, standardized by these machines. and still being practiced right now in cabs that have been working for half a century. Driving the EMD GP38-2 and SD40-2 is the everyday craft of American railroading. The operating experience the F-unit created, standardized across the network by these machines, and still being practiced today in locomotives half a century old. This is part 6 of our From the Cab series. The earlier videos covered the Big Boy, the GG1, the F-unit, the K4, and the Class JR Companion. What's Under the Hood series covers the engineering, all linked in the description. Next we cover driving the Southern Pacific GS4 Daylight, the high-speed passenger steam locomotive that ran the California coast, and the experience of operating steam built for pure speed and beauty. Subscribe so you do not miss it. There are more locomotives to examine and more cabs to climb into. We will keep telling the story of how the machines were actually operated by the people who worked them.